Fantastic. Okay, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. Give me 1 second.
And make sure you have control over it, right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see the agenda for tonight. Awesome. Okay, so we shall officially call our meeting to order and go ahead and dive in. As far as I know, we only have members of the commission on the call, aside from Bill, who we will get to in just a moment. So I assume there's no public comments. I don't know. I assume Doug or Mel, if you heard of anything through the city, you would have passed that along.
Yes, didn't hear from anybody for public comments.
Okay. Then we will scoot along to approval of the minutes from last time. We didn't have a quorum in January. So for our minute approval, we're going all the way back to December 9th, which feels like 97 years ago. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from December?
I move to approve them.
I second.
I'm going to assume that everyone is on board with approving of the minutes. Does anybody object to that or have any corrections?
I do not object.
Me neither. All good.
Approved. And I was worried there, Andrew. I was worried that as your first act as the newest member of the commission, that you would throw a wrench in the works. And and let's see. So now we'll dive into the juicier bits. So first up, so I think most people kind of know where we are on this, but it's been a while, and also Andrew, to bring you into the loop. So as you may know, we're still a relatively new commission, so we're still kind of getting our footing and all of our official ducks in a row. And so last year we worked on revising the city code that actually explains how the Percent for Art program works in West Linn. And since our group didn't exist, it didn't make any references to our commission as being a group of citizens that can make recommendations of how the Percent for Art funds can be spent. So we did that last year, and in there was this bit that's here in this particular, just the snippet from that that ordinance that specifically says that we will have various guidelines that like provide a process for different things, really, if you go through this. And so we created this guidelines document to essentially satisfy this requirement of the ordinance. And right now it's still in draft state. We're getting awfully close. We largely borrowed this from other municipalities. It's based really heavily on the city of Redmonds, because we had done some outreach to various organizations as we were getting started. But there were a couple more legal questions that we wanted to run by you, Bill. They're both highlighted in the version of the document that I have up here. But the first one is around, and they're the ones that I called out to you in the email I sent to you previously, around the idea of clear title. So yes, of course, we can't go around agreeing as a city to buy artwork from people who have no right to sell us the artwork. But I was wondering from a legal standpoint, if there's anything we needed to capture here.
Well, excuse me. Well, thanks, Carrie. Nice to see you again. So just for background of everyone, I've been involved with the Jordan Ramus firm off and on for a number of years. And Jordan Ramus has been your city attorney since about, I want to say 1989. And after the construction of the, at that time, new library, when the initial pieces of art were commissioned, I did work on contracts at that time with those artists. And I hope those are good agreements. I haven't seen them for a long time. My understanding in the work that I've done over the years, I believe that the clear title can be obtained by a contract with the artist. So obviously we want to be working with the most reputable people we can. I'm assuming that your intent is primarily to be buying new artwork, I saw within the documents, like many arts commissions, you're looking for the opportunity to have commissioned art that's unique to you, as opposed to trying to buy a Picasso. Obviously, if one of those can be donated, we'll go to great efforts to make sure that the title is very, very clear, as opposed to what I think your primary purpose is, which is to create a relationship with an artist to either produce a piece of art or sell you something that they have produced in their shop. So a clear title can be by a contract of sale, and that's the typical way that I've seen it. Now, I'm happy to hear that you based it on Redmond's. Redmond is a community that's up and coming and doing a lot of great things. Back in the day, when we initially worked on your initial contracts, there weren't too many arts commissions around, but one of the ones that I've been particularly impressed with is Lake Oswego's. And as you know, Lake Oswego went from a committee, a city committee, to then forming a 501c3. And I remember back in, maybe about 12 years ago, I worked on looking at some of their regulations as Milwaukee was creating its program. I then went on and worked for the city of Milwaukee, so I saw how theirs worked. So I think I said in an email to Carrie, and maybe it was to Doug and to Melanie, that I was suggesting that if you hadn't already taken a look at the work that Lake Oswego and Milwaukee have done, those are really good sources. I haven't been really given authority to do a lot of research, and I didn't want to be duplicating work that you had already done, because when I saw your guidelines, I was really impressed. So I know you've had good communications. Now I know it's with Redmond, but I knew you had good communications with someone. I wasn't sure whether you have some draft agreements. And again, I didn't want to be obligating funds to pay for our services. So I think if Lake Oswego, Milwaukee have some documents, we can obtain those either from their art staff or their city attorneys. With Milwaukee's, this might be particularly helpful because, as I said, Lake Oswego has shifted from being a city organization to a nonprofit. When Milwaukee started their arts plaza, which is next to the city hall, there's a really nice piece of ground that roughly 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, they began to commission artwork that they either would rent and potentially buy, or they would just rent and turn it back. And they would use a theme that the arts committee, there's a very active arts committee there, and they'd come up with a theme for the year. And by contract, they would obtain the rights to use a piece of art for up to a year. And primarily it's sculpture, but then I think they've also done artwork for City Hall and other places. So I think a clear title is simply a contract, and I think we can probably obtain from Milwaukee or Lake Oswego. Now another, oh, go ahead, Beate. Oh, okay.
So can you hear me? I did actually commission work for Tualatin City of Tualatin. There was a application process, and they wanted to have my work, and I have a contract from that. So how it all was settled, that I cannot replicate my work because it was a print, and that they only have the right to reproduce it and whatnot. I think I can provide that contract if that helps, how they do or how they did it to buy artwork for the city.
Yeah, I think the more examples that we can round up, the better. And as I recall, I've kind of just been wanting to get through the guidelines piece before we started figuring out the contract piece. But as I recall,
yeah, because you mentioned a clear title, so I don't know what I mean. It's, I guess 5 or 6 pages long. What I had to sign. So maybe that helps to find out more how a contract has to be when we really buy or rent work.
Right. I figured we would go through a similar process of taking whatever examples we can get our paws on and swishing them together into a contract that makes sense for us.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that type of contract would be very helpful, because there are different types of contracts. One might be one where the artist only wants to make the one copy and we're buying that. But if the artist is going to be able to make copies of that, obviously the price that we would be paying would be less than if we were looking for an exclusive. So I think you're going to have various types of contracts, as you said, that would be valuable to have, depending on what your purpose is. But again, I think it's an artist contract is what we want. And the other question that I saw that was asked about this was, well, what about the liability insurance for the artist? Oh yeah, thank you. The public liability, the property and image insurance. Well, my recommendation would be, since it is a city organization that we're talking about, that you are, that you work through the city's insurer, CIS, which is City County Insurance Services. They are an insurance pool that represent all but the 4 largest cities in the state of Oregon. Those organizations are self-insured. And what I remember Milwaukee did was we contacted CIS and we said, we're going to be creating this park that has artwork, and we're going to be bringing in commissioned art, and eventually we might have some that's permanent. We want to make sure that it's properly covered. You've identified a great issue. The artists really are not in a typical position of insuring art to lend out to a municipality. And in a municipality, particularly if it's outdoors, it's going to be in a different environment than on private property where there might be less people coming to. So I think it's entirely appropriate for the city to take on that responsibility after the art is brought and installed. So within the contract, we're going to want to make sure that there is a provision for how is the art going to be properly brought to the city, where is it going to be located, and obviously we're going to want the artist to tell us what it needs, how it should be affixed so that there is no damage to the art. And of course, the city's facility people are going to be concerned about making sure that wherever it's going to be installed, it isn't damaging either a sidewalk or a city building, however, whatever it's going to be connected to. So there needs to be a pre-agreed upon process for where and how it's going to be installed, who is responsible for it. And our expectation would be that the insurance, that the artist would already have insurance on their work or on the process of delivery, responsibility for delivery to the artist, and have the artist install it with, I think that would be the appropriate way, unless I'm stepping beyond what an artist would expect to do. I think the artist has certainly a great investment in wanting to make sure that it's properly located exactly how they want it to appear in the environment, properly affixed so that it's not going to be damaged. And then CIS, our insurer, might give us some input depending on the type of structure that it is to make sure that elements of the art are not extending into a walkway or a low hanging or in any way contribute to creating a health issue, a public safety issue. So there's some negotiation there, and there would be an agreement that would be drafted that would talk about those details so that there can be a sign off at the end of the installation that it was properly done. So CIS is happy with the placement, that it's met the expectations. And then it would be included within the inventory of the facilities and buildings and other things that are insured by CIS for the city. And if we're a temporary a temporary installation, it would be the city's obligation, obviously, to keep our insurance premium down, to notify CIS at the time that the artwork is taken down and returned to the artist.
I have a quick question just based on your experience with
Mhm.
insurance of this kind. Would that insurance then also cover the artwork itself?
Well, it may not totally cover the artwork because the artist has an investment in it. So there'd be some coordination, but the city would make sure that it's any responsibility that it has is covered. The artist may not be totally covered.
So it would be likely, like the situation would be that the liability and property damage, like if a sculpture fell and broke the pavement and bonked somebody on the head, the pavement and the head bonking would be covered by CIS, but the damage to the sculpture, that would be up to the artist to figure out it, like if they want to insure it or if they just wants to be, you know, that's too bad and I'm sad, but I'm not going to
Yeah.
get a separate policy on it or whatever, their own personal choices there.
Yes, because obviously we're not going to be able to ensure with all certainty that it has been constructed to a point that it's going to be able to withstand whatever conditions exist. We're going to want to have some assurance that it's properly constructed and that every effort is made to prevent it, once it's placed, to be a public hazard or potentially dangerous situation. And West Linn has the conditions in West Linn with it's not flat land. There's issues of environmental issues all throughout the community due to slopes and other environmental factors. So I think there's a heightened level of shall we say expectation in West Linn. So I think that would want to make sure, again, that the facilities people and probably your Parks and Recreation and Building Department would want to make sure that structurally we don't have an issue.
I have a question about kind of liability that the city might take on as a result, as it revolves around artwork that they obtain. So if a sculpture is taken from an artist to be displayed, to my understanding would be that the city should be responsible for any damage that occurs to that art while it is in their possession. Because at this point, what should have happened is the art should have been inspected to make sure that it was constructed to a level that was appropriate for display. And then that inspection passes some form of liability onto the city so that if it's damaged, at that point it's outside of the artist's control because they don't have control over the sculpture anymore. And so they shouldn't be liable for damage that occurs to their sculpture in kind of a normal situation. So if someone comes and vandalizes and intentionally damages it, it's no longer the fault of the artist. And if a tree falls on it or something else happens to damage it, again, it's not the fault of the artist. It's the responsibility of the city that is the caretaker of the art. And so if the city potentially put it in a location where it was prone to be damaged, the city should be liable for those decisions as well, and offset responsibility from the artist that is just at that point providing the city with something for a permanent or temporary basis.
And Carrie, you saw the note that Doug wants to respond.
Yeah, I just thought it might be to interject. When I used to deal in over a gallery, oversee a gallery, when we would borrow we would take on loans, or we would loan materials out to other galleries or other installations. What we did was we call a condition report, which is kind of what normally happens especially with more hanging art, but also with sculptures as well. So at that, it's the physical things described, the item itself, the art, the condition of it is all noted, kind of like when you walk around a car when you rent it at the rental agency. And then upon the end of that, that time that it's been loaned or you're getting it back, a condition report is then matched up against the original condition report. That's usually what art insurers want to do. I think, Lauren, you probably would know a little bit more about that from your family, but that's usually what happens. And I would think that I'm happy to go into my own personal archives and find the condition reports that we use. That they're fairly standard in the field, depending a little bit upon what kind of medium you're working in. But that might be what the CIS would like to see, but also might then handle it from a liability and a risk management side of things.
Yeah, I think that would be very valuable. Then the issues of the vandalism and the damage done by a falling tree. Well, obviously with the vandalism, that would be the coverage that we would have. That would be something that would not be attributed to the quality of the artwork. That would be an act that we would have coverage for. The issue of the falling tree, it would be incumbent upon us to make sure that we do a proper analysis and place the structure in a place that's going to limit exposure. And in fact, I believe we would be able to have CIS come out and give us some guidance, perhaps the first couple of times, to make sure that they are comfortable that any decisions that we're making for placement are appropriate. And they might point out to us, based on their history, some things that they're greatly concerned about, and give us some direction that there's areas either on the library property or another suitable place within the community that is appropriate. I saw within the guidelines there were comments about the potential of placing artwork in public right-of-way, and that's always a concern, because when you start talking about public right-of-way, you start to talk about the real public safety issues of presenting something that becomes an obstruction, either that is a visibility issue, that is a contributory factor in a property damage or a loss of life. So CIS, again, will give us the benefit of their expertise and their experience working with other communities. Now, at some point in time, you might want to think too about whether or not the Arts Commission becomes a 501c3, because fast forwarding to the end of your set of guidelines, there's a discussion about donations and contributions. And frankly, I really can't provide any guidance as to.
Before we go to the next step, I
Yeah.
just have one last thing on the insurance piece. So based on how that is in these guidelines, this says that the artist is required to have liability insurance. Should we just strike that? Because basically, if the city purchases something, then the artist is relinquishing all responsibility, and the city should have insurance. And if an artist is loaning something, the city should still have insurance, and the artist, as Carrie said earlier, can just decide whether or not they want to personally insure the piece above and beyond whatever the city would do. So because this is very specifically saying, in order for us to procure your art, you have to have this thing, should we just take out that thing?
Well, I'm interested in knowing the history of this. If this language is directly out of the city of Redmond's, then I think we ought to confer with the city of Redmond and find out, why was this language so important to them that they have that requirement, and what has their experience been? Because my experience is more in the area of the city contracting with providers of services or providers of goods, and we provide a standard template for a contract. And unfortunately, those contracts are really not suitable for your purpose, so I didn't send those along. But those contracts provide that there would be liability insurance, workers' compensation, et cetera, et cetera. And historically, what happens, I hate to say this, is we will attach that template to a request for proposals for someone to provide services or goods. And after someone procures the contract by either their qualifications or the best price, they then want to start to get into the detail of those agreements and say, well, we can't live with this. We don't have insurance for this. We can't afford this. I think you're going to run into the same situation with most artists who are going to be saying that primarily they don't have such insurance. So it's going to become a question of how big is the project? How important is it that you have insurance? Because one size doesn't fit all for the type of projects that you have. I think when you're dealing with sculpture, and again, something that's large, heavy, could become a liability, then we might want to be more specific and more demanding. But on a smaller project, it's going to be a judgment call.
So maybe, and so to provide the background that you asked for, Bill, so this was taken verbatim from the
Mhm.
city of Redmond. We modified it to suit our needs, but that was one thing that jumped out at us as, well, this is peculiar. They must have included it for some reason, but it seems like a horrible burden to put on the artist, and which is the kind of the short version of what brought us to this conversation today. In a lot of cases where we felt like, well, maybe sometimes that's necessary, but we could also see how it could be a barrier to, all artists everywhere
Mhm.
being able to apply. We've just wordsmithed it to make it much fuzzier. So maybe we do the same thing here, where it's like the city reserves the right to, request that the artist do this, but have it be, more of the small print as opposed to this is always the case. By the way, I'm noticing right now that the numbering is totally squirrely, and I don't know why. I think it's because Google Docs is just having trouble with the nested ordered lists from Microsoft Word.
Meeting.
So I promise it's not like that in the real thing.
So Betty
I
had a
had
comment.
some experience with liability insurance as an artist myself, and I found that I work with some university groups in Oregon, and they always require as a vendor that you have liability insurance. And in talking to their people about that, the main reason for that is if you're coming onto university property and installing things, they want to make sure that you're essentially insured for that amount of time. And so if you trip and fall and do something that you shouldn't, your insurance will cover that and not theirs. And to me, that my understanding was that was their intent on their liability insurance requirement. With other organizations that I've dealt with as an artist and smaller scale, that has not ever been a requirement at all. And I found that in working with other cities, frequently the liability insurance that they have with sculptures covers everything while they have the sculpture, and then you have the option to either say you're going to wing it and be responsible of it if something good or bad happens, or you have the option to get your own insurance for things like transportation to the site and things of that nature.
Okay, so it's less about in perpetuity. It is your job as the artist to make sure nothing bad ever happens to anyone or anything ever. It's more while you're actively installing the sculpture or painting the mural or whatever,
Exactly.
and you fall off the ladder, you can't sue the city.
Yes.
So
So
I
that
want
makes
to add
sense.
something. I guess when you apply for a show or something, it always says the artist is responsible for the artwork. But in that case, what I'm talking about is also the delivery. So if you send something by mail, let's say I'm a printmaker, so if I send framed work or unframed work, they always want to have it's insured until it is hanging on their walls or so, if they accept your work. And I think that's also a liability thing, because you can always say, hey, you broke the glass of my piece, or you broke the whatever, or ripped it apart or whatnot. So I guess this is also the part of the delivery time, or until from you send it from your home until it's ending up at the show, and vice versa. I think that might be a thing what we have to think about, because if we don't have, if it's a big piece and we don't have, the artist has insurance and something, it falls down before we even have installed it, they can say, hey, you know what, you destroyed it, and whatever you have, but it's maybe the artist was responsible for that because he didn't pack it right or something, so that is maybe we have to think about too.
Well, so I would my suggestion for the next steps on this is, I think, Bill, to your point, it would be good to follow up with the city of Redmond and find out what sort of horrible backstory got this insert, because I bet this is one of those things where it wasn't in the first draft and then something weird happened. But I'm also thinking that, barring some sort of really compelling reason from Redmond, that for the sake of this document, which in my mind is like the purpose of this document is to kind of provide boundaries of how we as a commission operate, how we make sure that we're not kind of like this next section here of conflict of interest, that we as a group have policies in place to help ensure that we aren't just, cherry picking each other's artwork and becoming some sort of, underground Westland art mafia. But have all of that get pushed out, the things that govern our relationship with one individual artist, have that pushed out to the contract, because it sounds like there's going to be totally different scenarios, whether we're talking about a mural where somebody could get hurt in the creation of it, or a sculpture where somebody could get hurt if it fell over, versus a framed print in a library where the odds of anyone getting hurt are pretty darn slim. And the potential damage to the artwork is kind of a different situation as well. So maybe we, again, barring some compelling reason, remove this entirely from this document and push that out to the contract.
I think that's a good idea. And this discussion has been really helpful for me to know that and be confident that you have people on your commission who have specific knowledge as artists and experiences to be able to help you to determine at what level and to what degree should something be required. The comments about the delivery of the art, and that was a perfect example of the type of issue. When I went to law school, the commercial transactions, we spent quite a bit of time talking about whose responsibility it is for any type of a product that's produced. When does it become a transfer of ownership from the creator to the recipient who's bought it? And when you're dealing with artwork, obviously only the artist is going to know the frailty or the weight distribution or the things that are necessary for the proper packing and delivery. So it'd be totally appropriate to put that responsibility on the artist. And I would assume that would be the artist's intent, to make sure that they have hands-on responsibility to make sure that their work is preserved, particularly in those instances when it's being delivered for display as opposed to actual sale. So I'm very comfortable from the conversation you're having of your abilities to structure arrangements that are unique to the circumstances of the artwork.
Sounds good. So when we do get to the contract drafting stage, like having templates for that, and we do need to start involving CIS, is that something where you could put us in touch with the right person, or Doug or Mel, would you know who we would need to reach out to make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's properly?
Yeah, we'll connect you with Lauren and Kathy, city recorder and the city finance director, and they can connect us with the right person in CIS.
Okay. And I don't think that's something that we need to worry about right this moment, but just want to make sure that we knew how to do that when the time.
Yeah, and if you could reach out to Redmond and to Lake Oswego, Milwaukee, and Beaverton to ask for their templates for the contracts that they use, I'm sure they'll be totally willing to do that. I took a look at Lake Oswego's Arts Commission on the website, thinking that I'd be able to easily access that. And unfortunately, it's not as easy to get as it was 10 years or so ago. And it's possible because they're tweaking it and they don't want to represent that something can't be customized. But I'm sure that those folks would be really helpful and share at least the template and some examples.
It's funny that you mentioned the cities that you did, because when we first went through this process of just reaching out to sister organizations to help us figure out what we were supposed to be doing with ourselves, we reached out, I think, to everyone you've mentioned. So I didn't hear back from Milwaukee or Beaverton. And I think, we were doing all this during the pandemic too, so it wasn't the world's best
Uh-huh.
timing. But I like Lauren, I think you talked with Lake Oswego, and we talked with Redmond and Sisters, and I think it was Redmond, completely built their program based on Lake Oswego's when they were still a city organization. So it's just kind of
Right.
funny that there's just this relationship of everybody borrowing each other's paperwork.
Yeah, very typical.
Yeah.
So did you have other areas that you want to cover within the agreement, or rather within the guidelines? Because I thought it was very complete. I was making comment about a portion at the end, but I heard you say conflict of interest. Did you want to have a conversation about conflict of interest?
To be honest, I haven't personally read through this in detail in a long time, so I don't know that I can
Okay.
articulate any questions off the top of my head. Lauren, I don't know if you had any questions around that section. I think we borrowed that one really heavily from, because as I recall, Redmond had nothing about conflict of interest, and so we pulled all that from RACC, the Regional Arts Council, something else that starts with C, that oversees the Portland and Multnomah County Arts Councils.
Yeah, I mean, for
Well, the
me, I don't,
conflict of interest.
oh, I was just gonna say, I think, yeah, there was a small subcommittee of us who went sort of through these, and most of them either, as Carrie just said, were either lifted directly, or I think a lot of the things that I personally had questions about were just things that were creating barriers for artists. And so making sure that the reason we had those in there was sort of, appropriate and they belonged there. But I think, Carrie's got some things highlighted, and that most of it does seem pretty straightforward. Like, we don't want to become an arts mafia. It's not our plan. So
Just so I have an understanding of how this works, would we be the ones who are voting on whether or not a piece of art becomes part of a city collection, or is that a greater body of people that makes that decision?
Well, a lot of that is, like, we haven't done any of these things yet. So we were just trying to get some of these policies in place to help guide what we would do in that situation. And so this document outlines like how there's, where is it? We talk about like different ways in which we might get artwork. Where is it? We talk about how like sometimes we might just go directly to an artist, and there's with a commission versus having more of an open call for art. I'm not finding it.
but we might do a juried something.
Yeah.
The commission might choose themselves, just with the 5 or 6 of us, or however many there are.
Yeah. So I'm an artist, and I've done public art as well. And so in the event that there was a proposal that felt that it was something that I might want to do, would there potentially be an avenue for me or somebody else who's an artist on the commission to be able to get, a fair shot at applying for things that they could essentially recuse themselves from the decision-making process and say, hey, I'd like to at least have an opportunity to put my hat in the ring?
Exactly what you just said, the latter. So that's at least that's the intent. And so I'll send this to you so that you can dig through it.
Yeah, I'm seeing this all new, so it's
yeah, totally. So I can send this to you, and you can read through it, and certainly open to any additional related to that or otherwise feedback you might have. But the idea is that we say in here that sometimes the commission might be the selection committee, but not always. But also the artist being reviewed can't be on the selection panel. And so the idea is that basically whoever's making the decision is never the person who's being decided upon,
which I think is
whether or
important.
not you're on the commission.
Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, agreed.
And if I may, it looked like you had a good protection in there, because you have a provision that talks about that a selection panel serves through the completion of one public art project. So you have the opportunity that someone who might be interested in a specific location or a specific type of artwork to not be a participant on that panel.
Right, to basically recuse yourself from just that one decision.
Right.
And some of these, like, to be honest, a lot of the conflict of interest stuff, I started just winging it when I was writing it. And so again, Andrew, anyone else, I definitely want the more eyes on it, the merrier, because as I mentioned, the reference document was RAC's, and theirs was so complex, and they were dealing with paid employees whose job it is to do this thing, where they knew that they would never be the creator, and so there were assumptions that went into that. So we tried to kind of tease that apart and fill in the gaps where we needed to. But yes, like I said, more eyes on it, the merrier. So I'll be sure to send it to you. I assume your email, Andrew, is in that
Yes, it is.
spreadsheet. Okay, cool. Any other questions or comments or anything about this document for the time being?
I think I'd just kind of like to second what Bill had said earlier about when we think about acquiring art, we're probably going to end up doing that at a multi-tiered approach. We're not always going to want to buy all of the rights from somebody. I think that's like the most expensive way to do it. And so we just have to make sure that we know what our intentions are when we purchase a piece of art so that we can have the appropriate agreement with each artist.
Yeah, definitely not one size fits all.
Yeah.
And I think another point on that is when you are making a purchase of a unique piece of art. I saw within your disposition section that the first opportunity was to return to an artist or an artist's family. It'd be really helpful if in your contract for a commission piece of art that there be a statement of what that expectation is, because if I remember correctly, there have been some changes in the law over the years, and there are oftentimes those disputes about whether or not an artist really gave up all of their rights, or whether they could give up all of the rights that their family members might be entitled to for their intellectual property. And I'm far from an expert on intellectual property, but I do know enough to be concerned about making sure that we give that some scrutiny.
My understanding as an artist is when you create a bit of art, you're not intrinsically giving up intellectual property surrounding that. And so in order to give that up, you have to explicitly state it. And so if you're saying, hey, we want to buy a piece of art for the purpose of being the exclusive owners, and we want to be able to reproduce it, and we want to be able to do all of those types of things, usually that is not implied in any way. You have to explicitly state it before the artist actually gives up any of those rights, because by default, they go back to the creator of the artwork, unless there was a specific agreement about it.
Thank you. That triggered some memory cells that I thought were up there, but I just couldn't access them. I think that's great advice.
Well, thanks so much, Bill, for taking the time to meet with us and provide
welcome.
some insight on this. Andrew, I'll send this over to you after our meeting, just in its current state, but then I can also figure out who it was I spoke to in Redmond so many months ago, and find out the backstory on the liability one, and then we can strip it out if, like I said, if there's no really good reason to keep it in there. That work for everybody?
Great. If we can be of service later on, just let us know.
I am sure we will have all kinds of questions for you when we get into our first contracts.
Okay, great.
Everybody's
Nice to
favorite
see all of you.
price boy.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Okie doke. Before we move on to the next couple of things, I realized as you were talking, Andrew, that I was totally remiss. I just hopped into the agenda and started plowing away. But you might like an opportunity to introduce yourself. to us so that we know more about your background and what kind of art you make and all that good stuff?
Sure. So my name is Andrew Young. I have been doing art for the large bulk of my life. And so I think I did my first public art piece when I was in first grade. And so I was getting commissioned to do public art at a very young age. And as someone who just made a lot of art, there's always been lots of opportunity for me to do things throughout my life. And so I've made that my career. And so I run a media production company where I help businesses with, a large array of their media needs. So whether it be a website or graphic design or promotional materials and et cetera, et cetera. I'm kind of a one-stop shop for people to help their businesses display themselves well. And I also do a focus on exhibits. And so I've been able to do some museum design. If you're ever in Charleston by Coos Bay, I did all of the work at the Charleston Marine Life Center. So that's all my work. And you can see stuff that I did all over the place. But I'm always trying to get a new skill or three, and I like to be able to be a well-rounded artist. And so I have a lot of random information that I can help with. So I'll try and be a help in different capacities. I've worked a lot with university groups, specifically the University of Oregon. And so I have an interesting perspective as being a vendor for the University of Oregon. And then I work with University of Washington, and I'm working with a handful of others as well. And so I think I can bring some good perspective for you. And yeah. And so that's me. I could go on talking for a while, but I won't derail you too much. So.
Well, welcome aboard. We look forward to working with you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And right now we just have the four of us, but there's three more of us who I'm sure you will meet, albeit virtually, over the coming months. Okay, so now we will switch gears entirely to a new piece of business for all of us. So a while back, I guess it was like mid-January-ish, and Doug, you might need to chime in at some point on this one. The Friends of the McLean House reached out to Doug asking for a letter of support from the library for this project that they are hoping to undertake soon. And while they were at it talking to Doug about that, they asked if the Arts and Culture Commission would be interested in providing a letter of support for the project as well. So what the project is if you've been there, they have the big concrete pad in the backyard that has more of like a temporary tent shelter over it. And they want to turn that into a more permanent structure. The idea being that when they host events there, having a bunch of people parading through in a historic property is not always in the historic property's best interest. So hoping to take advantage of the grounds and the exterior of the house more by having facilities outside and year-round, rain cover, so that more events can take place there while still, without thrashing the house, essentially. So they put together this presentation that kind of walks through, kind of a sales pitch for the property and like why people like to have events at the McLean House, and talking about some of the different design options that they're considering for it, looking to, work with the existing architecture, not detract from it, but also not being hugely expensive. And so they're looking, as I said, they're looking for a letter of support from various community organizations. I know, speaking for myself personally, the very first time I ever went to the McLean House was randomly enough, it was where there was a Parks and Rec Minecraft coding camp happening. Because why wouldn't you have a Minecraft coding camp in a historic house's living room? And so I was there to drop off and pick up my kids. And when I was there, this was before I'd ever even heard of the Arts and Culture Commission. I was thinking this would be such an awesome place if the city of West Linn ever starts doing an art festival again. And so then this rolled around, and so I thought that I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity to push the idea of this being a potential destination for an art festival, in a land where in-person events takes place. So I just wanted to put that forth to the commission to see if anybody has questions about why we would or would not do this, or concerns about it, or you could ask questions, although I know I personally probably don't have the answers.
So when I saw the email and the information, the first thing that came to my mind was like, what do we have to do with that? Because it's only a pavilion. I don't know how you pronounce it. Sorry when it's not right. But that's a building, or adjacent. How do you say that? Yeah. So it's nothing with. I mean, it looks like a piece of art, but it's a building, or it's a. And so I think if there would be artwork that goes with it, that would be interesting to see. But as you say, maybe they want to have all these big posts engraved, or I have no idea. That would be something I can agree with, but only because they want to have a wooden structure installed. I think as an art commission, that wouldn't fit in our agenda, or how do you say that? Yeah,
I don't think so. The way I interpreted it wasn't that they were looking to us as because architecture is arguably a form of art, and therefore it's up to us to determine whether or not it's worthy. I didn't read it that way at all. I was thinking it was more, they're just looking for community support, and basically they want to be able to say, look, we have umpteen different community organizations that are on board, and here's all of their different brilliant ideas of how this will be a vital part of our community. Sorry, go ahead, Doug, with what you wanted to say.
Sure, thanks. I just as far as I understand from clarifying what Mike Waters, who is the person who reached out, as well as Diane, the caregiver caretaker of the McLean House, it was more for support for the idea that we would want to use something like that if it was available to have art in it. So it wasn't. This has to go to the Historical Review Board, and the Historical Review Board is the governing body with the Planning Commission to make the determinations. Does this fit historically with that building? Does that make sense to give the permit to do it? So that's not that resides in that with that group. This was more what they were asking for, and what we gave at the library was just, yes, we've used the McLean House as partners. Yes, if there was a facility like this, we would want to use it. We used it for our Harry Potter Day, and we used it for other activities as well. And we like to partner because it's close by, and it's a nice venue. And if it was covered all the time for all 4 seasons, we could see ourselves using the facility. It wasn't necessarily, it was just that. It wasn't commenting about the architecture or the art. That's kind of, the architecture side is going to be determined really by what is approved or not approved by the Historical Review Board and the Planning Commission. I hope that clarifies a little bit.
I think it'd be lovely to have more covered areas in West Linn that could be used for public activities. I think there's a deficit of that type of thing here in the community, and I think there's a significant need. And so if it's just a matter of support, I think absolutely, I think we should encourage more things like this that allow more people to access outdoor space.
Yeah, I'd also be in favor. So I would move. I feel like in one of those emails, either Doug or Mel said that they would draft a letter, or I don't know. I don't know if we're supposed to make a letter on our own.
Yeah, so don't get me wrong. It's not that I don't want to support it. It's more like I was wondering what they actually want from us. Besides, a check that says, okay, we support that with a sort of amount of money and we get a plug on it? Or as Doug said, maybe they want to have us with artwork, with artwood decorated, or whatever you can do with a building like that. So I think it's I like that concept that they have. But in general, I was wondering, yeah, what can we actually do? And so maybe we should ask them also what they might expect from us as a group.
Well, I don't know if you remember whenever it was shortly after we were formed, but there had been an idea to have a spring or fall like art event there, and then
exactly
everything shut down. So I think that is sort of the idea of the
okay
partnership, that it's like, yeah, it would open the space, they might not charge us for it, we could have artists come and we can set up booths or whatever.
Okay, I was more under the impression we should do something or should have something to do with the building or with the construction. So I was like, what should we do with that? Besides, as I mentioned, maybe you can have a nice wood carving or so. But if it's more like to have later on a use option, that's for sure. That's a good idea. Yeah.
Would Doug, do you think it'd be helpful if you sent them all a copy of the letter that we drafted from support of the library so that they can read?
Sure. If you want me to do that,
I think that might help them to understand.
Yeah, I can, if you want, I can even put it up on the.
Maybe
share it with you.
Screen so that.
Yeah, let me grab it real quick here.
And Lauren, that might answer your question about who would draft the letter.
Yeah.
I think that was Mel's nice way of saying one of us would draft the letter.
No, I'm happy to draft it. By all means, Doug and I are quite capable of drafting the letter. I think it's more, we just wanted to make sure you guys were in support of this, because I think it would be very valuable to our community and a nice place for art shows in the future if we ever get back to some kind of normalcy. So
agreed. Yeah,
you all see that?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Doug. Hey, I have one question, and Doug, I don't know if you'd be in a position to answer it or not. The one thing that I wonder about of having events there is around parking. So I know when I did like a art and garden gala there a few years ago, I just wound up like parking around the corner, and I know like for Harry Potter Day, you guys had essentially a shuttle service. Is that typically what happens? Is there like a shuttle service between there and like people park at Market of Choice or something? Or
I understand, and I would want this clarified. I will mention it, but I don't know of how much truth there is to it. In past conversations I've had, I believe it's is it called the West End Park? It's there's a park, there's a piece of property that's next to the McLean House that the city owns. And then of course there's also the ODOT property that's underneath the bridge. Right. There's a name for that park, and it escapes me at this moment. I believe, and again, I'm not 100% sure of this. I'm not even 50% sure, but I recall saying that for larger events, there was an ability to park cars down there in that area. There was it was safe to do that, and they have done that in the past. I know there was some talk. We talked about our library foundation partnering with the McLean House in the past about doing like a farm to table dinner out there, like you see around this part of the Willamette Valley in West Linn, as a fundraiser. And that was one of our concerns was, how would we be able to? Would we have to shuttle people from the library or other places? And they said, no, there's this place in the park that we have that we could use. I need to clarify that with Ken Warner, the Parks and Rec director, and make sure, as well as the McLean House folks. But I believe there's a possibility to do that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I mean, at least for me, the decision to write a letter of support, certainly wouldn't hinge on that. I was just curious how large events happen there when there's very limited street parking and a very small parking lot, but that would make sense. And of course, there's things like the the big Lake Oswego Festival of the Arts. It's like they have parking there, but then they also do the shuttle service. So it's certainly not out of the question to coordinate things like that too.
So I would say this letter makes total sense to me, and I would therefore move that something similar be put forth by the members of the Arts and Culture Committee.
I second.
Agreed.
Thumbs up from Beata.
So if we wanted to make life a little easy, I could talk to Mike tomorrow. If you like this letter and you think it represents what you would want to say, we can resubmit it and add your name as well as the library. So it could be the library's letter as well as from the Art and Culture Commission. If you want your own separate one, I'm not trying to get out of work. I'll write one for you as well to see if you'd like it and added it. But I think that it would have similar impact. This is going, of course, to the Westland Historical Review Board, and to see that those, I don't necessarily think one would outweigh the other, and maybe together that would be, I think would have the same impact. But I truly am not trying to get to work. I'm happy to write another letter, but in the expediency, I know that they wanted this January 27th. We got it to them on Monday. And so I know that they're anxious to have it. So if this works for you and you want to vote on that, I could just add it, and then we don't have to go back and forth with drafts and other things too. But we'll do it. Mel and I will do it whatever you'd like us to do.
I mean, I think the letter is good. There's such a strong relationship between the McLean House and the library, and there isn't as of yet with the Arts Commission, but I'm happy to just be an extra couple sentences in there. That's fine with me personally.
I would say the same thing. Like, I mean, maybe we don't need the Harry Potter to poetry reading, but instead maybe we are looking forward to work with them in the future or so, because that was the plan last year. So maybe some sentence like that instead of your specific explanation why the library is connected to the McLean House. But besides that, I like the text as well.
Okay, Mel, do we have that? Do we have that letter? Do you remember the letter we wrote? I think we wrote a letter in support of the art festival, the spring art festival that didn't happen because of COVID. Is that
we
right?
did.
We did. And I'm sure that I have it on the P drive, which means I need to remote log in. So I can't access it right now because
Right,
I'm not on
we
my
could send it.
desktop.
How about we'll just work off a draft of that a little bit,
Mhm.
send it out to you all tomorrow. And if you can we can gently persuade you to quickly respond with anything that you want to take out or add to it, so that we can hopefully get that to the folks at the McLean House by the end of the day tomorrow. I know it's a little rushed, and I know we're all busy, but I think that if that will work with you, we'd be happy to expedite it on our side.
Can we all agree that any lack of response to Doug and Mel's email about that by 5 p.m. tomorrow signals our implicit consent?
Sounds good.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, we'll get something out to you guys then.
We'll get it out to you
Thanks.
long before 5, so you have some time to look at it.
You'll send it at 4:59 and be like, well, it's 5, didn't hear anything. Moving on.
We won't do that.
I trust you. Okie dokie.
Okay.
Anything else on the McLean House front before we continue along? Okay, going to close all these tabs. So that brings us to Little Baja. That brings us to our last agenda item, an update on our proposed planter project with the historic Main Street. So by way of background on this one, we've been talking with the historic Main Street organization that oversees stuff along Willamette Falls Drive. and like they've been, instrumental behind the changes along there. And we were in talks with them about potentially partnering with them on some sort of community art project that would like kind of pull together the entire downtown area there. And what we were looking at was doing some sort of like large planters where different community groups or individual artists, we haven't quite gotten that far yet, would essentially have their own planter to either like paint or maybe do a mosaic on or whatever the case might be, all within a similar theme. So the idea was kind of along the lines of like the cows that I think they aren't there anymore, but that used to live along like Northwest 23rd in Portland. Or there's horses in Saratoga Springs, New York, or there's bears in Grants Pass. Like various cities have like some sort of common elements that different artists have decorated differently around the town. So a couple updates on that front. Beata, I don't know if you want to talk more about Rebecca's email, but I pulled it up just so people.
Oh yeah, I briefly read it because I saw also you were on it, and I wasn't sure if we should send it to everybody. But in general, she was proposing if we can have a shared meeting, some sort of, to discuss further. And I think Doug sent that email with the pictures of the planters, what are pretty small looking. But in general, I guess, yeah, they or Rebecca sent me and Carrie the email that they were like proposing to maybe have a shared meeting, some sort of, to have a better discussion and information, and also a better view of what both groups might want to have been installed or so. So I don't know, can we share the email with everybody then, or?
I'm happy to forward it. You guys can see it now, right? I'm sharing a little window of just the email.
Besides that, I don't.
Well, no, I mean, I'm
know
happy to
more.
forward
I don't
it. I
know.
want to make sure that people can see it right now too.
But in general, I don't know more than the email, and it came yesterday or the day before, right?
Yeah. The one thing that caught my attention, and it was totally just in passing, I agree with her that it would be good to have a joint meeting to kind of sort through this more. But in passing, she said, or possibly a similar project that would not take as much ongoing maintenance. And I felt that was signaling perhaps a delicate stepping away from like maybe she's had additional conversations with people, because of course planters, you do the art on the planter, awesome, maybe sometimes you have to touch it up, but more importantly, maintaining the plants on the inside. And so maybe she did some additional discovery around that and determined that might not be as easy to coordinate as originally thought. So I just wanted to draw that to everybody's attention as well, that we might need to be thinking about non-planter ideas too.
Maybe you guys can discuss the benches. Didn't you guys talk about that at one point? Benches?
It sounded like, so again, like we talked to her so long ago and we were walking up and down the street, and so I didn't take any notes at all. And my memory is not doing great lately. But I got the impression that they'd already ordered the benches, or they already had benches kind of like locked in, and it was going to be more of just like your basic, metal slats or something, something that wouldn't necessarily provide a good canvas. But I think that's worth re-raising with her.
And I think Terry was, she was talking about, she didn't know if the planters should frame the bench or not. We weren't clear about that. And then I wasn't at that walk, so I don't know exactly where the benches might really sit on. But in general, I guess that's the only thing she mentioned, that we have to discuss that again. And then she, Rebecca, sent in that email more further information, what could be also a shared project but yeah, in general, I don't know about the benches at all. And then she also was talking about these, what is it called? The flyers or the
flags or the banners or whatever.
Yeah, the banners. So I guess she didn't even mention that at all. And so I don't know if we should be involved in that as well, or if that is already said and done or something, because they want to have their logo on it, I guess.
That felt
so-
like more of a design project than a
exactly, yeah. So
project.
yeah, I guess the best thing is we should maybe have a shared meeting. And she was like to do what is it, a doodle poll to see when someone is available from us or for them to have a further discussion.
So I'm happy to forward along this message to people if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a meeting with them is good. Having a doodle poll, it's unclear to me. I mean, obviously, collaboration is the ideal outcome. I do feel like this, I don't know. I don't know them well enough, but I feel like clearly they've got a sort of vision for downtown. And it does seem like there might be an opportunity for us to try and help them enhance that in whatever way. But I don't know. It's hard for me to kind of figure out what their concept is. So a joint meeting would be great.
Yeah, I think that is the best way we can do that. I mean, that was my question the first time when I contacted her, if she wants to join our meeting to figure out what they really want. And then she was like stepping back and says, nah, she has to figure out that with their group. And as you said, that's my impression too. They have already something in mind, and maybe we only have to enhance that or support that or whatnot. But if they go, let's say, with the planters, and we say, oh, we want to do that next time in a different neighborhood, in a different strip mall or whatnot in West Linn, then it would be nice to know what their ideas are and what they actually really put out there. And so, yeah, maybe we don't have to jump on the wagon with the planters. But yeah, I think the best thing is to talk to them again.
Agreed.
I feel like I don't have enough information to really give much feedback here.
Yeah, what the group did is they came to us when they heard that we have this new West Linn Art Advisory Group, and we're asking if we want to join on their projects on the new design of the Willamette Falls Drive. And so one thing was that they were thinking about planters that might be from businesses, or the city would provide them, and other artists can do artwork on it. But then was the question, who is planting that, who's watering them over the summer or whatnot. And so the more we thought about it, or they thought about it, I guess the more complicated get the whole thing, because how has the planter look like? Is it wood? Is it big? Is it different? Is it always the same? Has it a theme? And so the further we discussed about it, the more, yeah, great ideas, but also obstacles, I guess, came along. And so now that was the latest we got a couple days ago, because she also couldn't make it last time to talk to us, that joint meeting discussion would be maybe a better way to clarify, yeah, the next step. I hope that helps you to
Yeah, there's
a little bit to understand our discussion here.
Of course, there's so many ways to integrate art into new construction that possibly what we need to do is, have during a discussion, basically say, look, these are a handful of options of ways that we could be involved. I know that a lot of municipalities do things similar with garbage cans, for instance. And so garbage cans and things that are utility boxes or things that are traditionally very ugly, they'll do an artist competition to have people selected who can provide artwork that can be printed and laminated on with a very simple vinyl. And that cuts down on a lot of the maintenance or vandalism or any problem there, because if worst case scenario, if anything happens to it, you rip it off and you print it again, and no one has to really maintain it. It gets color there really easily, but and maybe planters are a good idea, but I think there also could be a lot of questions as to how they're created, because usually when you're creating a pot, the decoration is a part of the pot making process. It's not always applied afterwards. And so you're going to have a lot of artists that are going to have different ideas of how they're going to decorate it. And some may be long wearing, and some may be, less long wearing. And so these are things to consider.
But yeah, but I think, Lauren, you said that they have already something in mind, because the project is going on for quite a while, and it's more or less, the street is more or less done with construction and everything. So we got information last year, mid year, or when was it? I can't remember. So they already had, I guess, something in mind, not quite sure what exactly, but they wanted to have these planters and benches in between and something like that, and then new lighting for the street. But yeah, so I guess we are more in the end phase of, is that the right word? Of the whole project. And so that's why we didn't exactly know what they want, but they were also not quite informative for us what it could be. And so they were open. And then when we mentioned this or this and this, and they were like, we have to think about it too. So yeah, I mean, as you said, I know that too. There's these electric boxes you can decorate, or trash cans or whatnot, but I guess they wanted to renew, or they want to have something new because the whole street is renewed, or then the whole setting of the street is renewed. And so that needs to be a different setting then.
Well, and really this all came about very opportunistically, right? So we were looking for ways to partner with different organizations in the city. They already had some projects on their short list that they thought might be a good fit for what we were looking to do. And we kind of landed on the planter piece because that had more opportunity for making it like a truer community art project, as opposed to, just kind of casting a vote and more of like a beautification effort, which is how I would classify things like the tree wells. So absolutely agree that they can be very decorative, but that's probably not necessarily our marching orders either. And so, like I said, it came about very opportunistically, but perhaps like we aligned perfectly at that point in time, but then reality of timelines and, things slipping around time-wise with COVID, and the reality of, wait, we actually need a guy to water the plants every week or whatever, the stars might not be aligning as well as we originally thought. And that's okay. But I think it's absolutely, it makes sense to meet with them again. And she also threw out this idea of essentially it sounds like a mural about our water supply, which might be interesting as well.
Well, and I would say, I mean, this is my own lens, right? But that, so the historic committee has a lot of ideas, and they have told us those ideas, but maybe other committees have ideas that they just haven't told us because they haven't. So I also would, like, if the planter thing falls apart, to just sort of automatically say, oh, well, your next idea is going to be the thing that we'd like to take up, that just to make sure that we're, whatever, keeping our ears open for all the opportunities and not just what this group is doing.
Absolutely. I think they've been particularly responsive in large part because, it's a very active project right now. They have paid staff to make the projects happen. And so of course there's going to be people more readily available to connect with than when we as a volunteer org are trying to connect with other volunteer orgs. And that's just our reality.
I think it's worth another conversation, and I think there's definitely going to be something that we could get behind, at some point.
Definitely. So looking at Doug's comment in the chat, is that something where, like, if we brought both organizations together, they're in their entirety, then it's a public meeting and we'll need to post it? Or does it make more sense to do it more as like a liaison model where somebody from our group tags along for their next meeting, presumably then that.
Right. For clarity, I'm not trying to scare anybody away from it. I just know that if we're meeting together as a body for public records laws, then you have to post that it's going to be a meeting that it does become public, and then just know that it needs to be about 10 days will cover everything for us. So that's all I was mentioning. Whatever you want to do is totally fine. It's just that if it's going to be the two bodies working together, we'll just have to notice it correctly, because it may not be on the same date that you normally have it could be on, in March or whenever, but it may not be on your regularly scheduled, first Wednesday of the month. So it's important to make sure that we notice that and properly, so that we don't get in trouble.
Yeah. Carrie, if you wanted to reach out maybe to Rebecca and see if her or anybody else would like to join us, then we could add them onto the agenda as we did a couple of months ago, if you would like to do that, rather than throwing out a doodle poll and having that all go around the mulberry bush, because you would have most of the ACC members joining in March, or you could set it for April. And then we could just add them onto the agenda. And then between the two of you, you guys can kind of drill down to what you want to discuss and do it. Might be easier to do it that way.
Yeah, it would definitely be easier on our end to do it that way, but we can see if that would.
The other issue, I'm sorry to interrupt, is that we have to, because we're in COVID, we have to do it this way. So so we have to have a live feed of some sort, which we have right now on YouTube. So we'd have to prepare all that piece too, where if you just have a meeting, you have the door open and people can come in. You don't have to deal with all those things as well. So we can all handle all those things if we just need to know in advance so we can do them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If you have, and this is like not a way to try to get around it, but just curious, if there was like a arts and culture subcommittee that met with a subcommittee from the historic board, and there's like 2 people from each board.
Yeah, as long as it's not the quorum, I believe that's what the records law say, or the public meeting law. So
Just like you guys worked with the subcommittee, you and Nancy and Carrie. Yeah, absolutely. And then when I come back and report in March or April or whatever it is, then I'm happy to add that to the agenda. But like Doug said, we've got to post it and create a link and connect it to YouTube. And by city laws, it has to be posted on the city website 10 days prior to the meeting. So.
Right. So it all just takes time.
Yeah. There I have a question too. So if that's why I didn't do it, but if we have an email response like that, can I send that to everybody, or has that also to be somewhere posted officially?
If you send it to the board alias, it'll automatically get saved for.
Okay.
Right.
So
and it's only
you
it's
have it.
only,
I have it. So, but if we send it now to everybody else, it will automatically post it. Oh, okay.
it will automatically. So public records law, as I understand it, is it needs to, if you're making a decision based on that information, then it would need to be posted. If it's just informational, then it's captured in the notes or in this video right now, because right now this video is live and it will be recorded, so thus people could see what is on the screen as well.
If we end up going the subcommittee route, is there anybody on the call right now who is particularly itching to be involved in that process?
I mean, I talked to her before, so if someone helps me out and join me, I don't know, Carrie, can you do that? That we both, because we are both in the emails all the time, that we reach out to her?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I can respond to the email and figure out what she wants, make you CC.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. And yeah, maybe extend the invitation if people want to join us in March. Awesome.
Exactly.
The option would be for us to set up a separate meeting entirely.
Okay.
And then doodle away. the appropriate subset.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, I think that wraps up that. I had a couple totally random things that I wanted to mention. One kind of related to what we were just talking about with public records law and navigating all that. Just a reminder of the message Mel sent out a while back that there's the advisory group training coming up on February 22nd, and I assume that we will get more information about that eventually, sometime between now and the 22nd. It's happening in the evening. And then the other thing that just floated into my inbox today or yesterday, I forget, is the Clackamas County Arts Alliance is actively recruiting new board members and new committee members for various things. So if you just can't get enough and want to do other similar groups, then they're recruiting right now. Or if you know of people who applied for one of our vacancies and didn't get it and is looking for other ways to get involved in the arts locally, then it might be a good opportunity. It also made me think that it might be another good time to reach out to them to remind them that we exist, since we haven't made a connection there yet.
I have something too. I got in my email a invitation for a jury show, and it's from the Wilsonville Arts and Culture Council. And they even have their own logo. Maybe we should try to figure out if we want to have an own logo too, that it identifies us. But they do or have already a show that's called Dream Beyond COVID, and now it's phase 2, and they have that visually on their website or something. So the idea is, if we have nothing to do with the planters or anything, maybe we can look into that as well and create a visual exhibition maybe later in the year.
Doing like a virtual show.
Yeah, and I think so their email or their in that case I said www.wilsonvillearts.org. So maybe we find out more about them and reach out to them to see how they did it and how long they already in place or so. I mean, we were talking about Milwaukee and everything, but maybe we should also reach out to Wilsonville.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I got that same, I saw that same call come through, but I didn't.
Yeah, I guess you always get the same stuff as I do.
We're on all the same mailing lists. I keep seeing you and like,
I guess.
and stuff.
Yeah. And so, yeah, what is it? Yeah, so accepted artwork will be featured in a virtual exhibition on the website. So of Wilsonville Arts and Culture Council from March 1st to March 31st. So that's what they did. And they did it already with one before. So.
And like earlier we mentioned Beaverton, and they're a similar model to us where it's you know, it's a city sponsored organization, whereas I think Wilsonville's a separate thing. But Beaverton did the same thing for their annual Beaverton Arts Mix. It was all virtual this year. So we could, just because we can't have a festival doesn't mean that we can't have a festival.
Doesn't mean we can't have nice things.
Exactly. Anything else people want to share or questions or anything? We're going to end right at 6:30. That's very exciting. And we started just about right on time too.
Yeah, I'm good. I have nothing else besides that.
I move we adjourn.